Mark always knew there was something in his life that didn't quite fit. Sitting in his usual spot in the back of the bus, he watched the city pass by, the lights flickering as the sun dipped below the horizon. But the bustling city felt distant, like part of a world he wasn't truly part of. That night, something inside him was different. At 24, Mark felt more restless than ever. He had avoided confronting his desires for so long, suppressing what he knew was his deepest truth. He had spent years ignoring the glances he threw at other men, convincing himself that it was temporary. But lately, he couldn't deny it anymore, especially when it came to Tyler, the bus driver who was always there, just out of reach. Tyler, in his early 30s, was tall, strong, and had a provocative way of driving the bus that made Mark's heart race every time he saw him. The exchanged glances between them happened almost daily, but that night, something was different. Tyler's eyes met Mark's in the rearview mirror, and the gaze lingered longer than usual. Tyler smiled. A smile that wasn't just friendly, but loaded with something more. Something Mark couldn't quite describe, but that made his skin tingle. When the bus stopped and Mark stood up to leave, Tyler called out in a low, almost intimate voice, "Good night, Mark. You doing okay tonight?" Mark froze for a second. Yeah, I'm fine," he murmured, his voice trembling. But the truth was that he could barely control the whirlwind of thoughts and sensations running through his body. In the days that followed, Mark couldn't stop thinking about Tyler, the way he drove the bus, the way his muscles moved under his tight shirt, the scent of wood and leather that seemed to linger in the air whenever Tyler passed by. It all awakened something primal inside him. He knew it was dangerous, knew that crossing that line could change his life forever, but the desire was unbearable. Then, on a Friday, when the bus was almost empty, and Mark was preparing to get off, Tyler did something unexpected. He stopped Mark at the door, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Mark's stomach churn. "Mark," Tyler said, his voice soft but authoritative, "I was thinking, how about you come over for dinner tomorrow night? Just the two of us. No pressure, of course." Mark felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His mind raced. Part of him wanted to run, but the other, wilder part that had been craving Tyler for so long, wanted nothing more than to say, "Yes, I'd love to," he replied. Before he even realized what he was saying, Tyler's smile was slow, almost predatory, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. "Great, I'll pick you up at 7. As the bus pulled away, Mark stood there, trying to process what had just happened. A mix of excitement and fear rushed through him. What would happen between him and Tyler? Was he really ready to cross that line? And more importantly, what did Tyler really want from him? That night, Mark barely slept. He questioned every decision he had made, every secret he still kept from himself, and what he might discover. But the truth was approaching, inevitably. The next day, Mark could barely concentrate. Tyler's invitation replayed in his mind over and over again as he tried to focus on anything else. But it was impossible. All he could imagine was the night to come. The way Tyler had looked at him, the provocative tone of his voice, and what might happen once they were alone. As the clock hit 6, Mark was already restless. He had spent hours choosing the right outfit. Nothing too flashy, but something that highlighted his body in just the right way. He settled on a fitted shirt that accentuated his broad shoulders, and the jeans that best showed off his legs. He knew he was trying to impress, but he couldn't help it. There was something about Tyler that made him want to be seen, to be desired. At exactly 7, Mark heard Tyler's car pulling up in front of his house. His heart raced, and he felt an electric excitement coursing through his body. Tyler stepped out of the car with an easy smile, but the intensity in his eyes betrayed much more. "You look great," Tyler said casually, but there was something deeper in his gaze. The drive to Tyler's house was filled with casual conversation, but beneath the surface, the tension was almost palpable. Every time Mark looked at Tyler, his skin tingled. He didn't know how the night would end, but he knew he wanted more, much more. When they arrived at Tyler's house, Mark was surprised by the atmosphere. The house was understated but sophisticated, with a cozy, masculine aura. The smell of wood and leather filled the air, an intimidating and seductive scent that only heightened the excitement Mark was already feeling. Tyler opened the door and let Mark inside, watching his every movement with an intensity that made Mark's body heat up. "Relax," Tyler said, grabbing a bottle of wine and pouring 2 glasses. "Let's enjoy the evening." Mark took a sip of the wine, trying to steady the tremor in his hands, but his mind was elsewhere. He watched Tyler, now leaning against the counter, his arms crossed, his muscles provocatively on display. There was something hypnotizing about him, the way his lips curved into a smile, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. And indeed he did. Dinner was simple, but the conversation, filled with lingering glances and subtle touches, was the true main course. Mark felt the heat in the air rise with every passing minute. The occasional brush of Tyler's hand, or the intense exchange of glances, left Mark breathless. He had never experienced anything like this. The way his body responded to every one of Tyler's gestures, as if the desire he had repressed for so long was now bubbling to the surface. After dinner, Tyler moved closer, stopping just inches from Mark. His piercing eyes examined every detail of Mark's face, and when he spoke, his voice was low and loaded with intent. "You know what I want, don't you?" Mark's heart raced. He couldn't speak, only nodding slightly, feeling the air grow thicker around him. Tyler smiled, a smile full of mischief, before closing the distance between them. his warm body pressing against Mark's. The initial touch was electric, enough to make Mark's world spin. Their lips met in a slow, almost torturous kiss. As if Tyler wanted to savor every second, Mark felt his hands slide down Tyler's arms, feeling the firmness of his muscles as Tyler's body engulfed him completely. The kiss quickly intensified, turning into an explosion of desire neither of them could control anymore. Tyler pushed him against the wall, and Mark felt his body surrender to the overwhelming heat that now consumed every cell in his being. When Tyler whispered in his ear, his voice raspy, it sent shivers down Mark's spine. "I've waited for this for a long time." Mark could hardly believe what was happening. The desire he had repressed for years was finally overflowing, and Tyler seemed to know exactly how to make the most of it. Every touch, every kiss, every breath was calculated to drive him wild with need, but there was more. There was something in Tyler's eyes that suggested deeper secrets, something dark and unexpected that Mark could barely begin to imagine, and he knew that this night was just the beginning of something much bigger. The tension between Mark and Tyler had reached a point that felt ready to explode. The deep kisses they shared, the intimate touches, it all seemed to be heading in a direction with no turning back. Mark's body responded to every one of Tyler's movements with an intensity he had never felt before. It was as if everything was erupting inside him. Every repressed emotion, every denied desire, now revealing itself all at once. When Tyler finally pulled him into the bedroom, Mark could barely contain his anticipation. The dim lighting created shadows that danced on the walls, and the heat emanating from their bodies filled the air. Tyler, now shirtless, displayed his physique in a way Mark had never seen up close. He was perfect, every muscle defined, and the way he looked at Mark was hypnotic. Mark was completely lost in that moment, as if nothing else in the world existed but them. But as the night unfolded in a feverish pace, something began to change. Tyler, who had always been in total control of the situation, started to reveal a side of himself that Mark hadn't expected. There was a dark intensity in his eyes, something dangerous, as if there was a part of his story he hadn't shown. Mark couldn't ignore the discomfort that brought, even in the midst of the desire that consumed him. At the most intimate moment between them, when Mark thought he had reached the peak of excitement, Tyler did something unexpected. With a sudden movement, he stopped, his eyes glowing with something strange. "There's something you need to know," Tyler said, his voice firm and low but loaded with a disturbing mystery. Mark stood still, his heart racing not only with desire, but also with a growing fear. What was Tyler about to reveal? I'm not who you think I am," Tyler continued, his breath heavy, as if he were struggling to control the words that escaped. Mark watched him, feeling the atmosphere in the room shift radically. The sensual heat from moments ago had turned into something cold, tense. I've hidden a part of myself. For years." Mark stood frozen, shock shooting that story through his body. "Hidden? What do you mean?" "I'm not just the bus driver you see every day." Tyler paused, looking deep into Mark's eyes, as if waiting for a reaction. "I came here, running from my past, a past that still haunts me." The shock hit Mark like an electric current. Everything around him began to lose meaning. "Running? From what?" "I was involved in something dangerous, Mark, and there's no way out of it. I thought I could leave it behind, but now they're finding me again. And you're in the middle of it." Mark stepped back, the shock now mixed with a growing wave of fear. "What does that mean for me? Who's after you, Tyler?" Tyler walked toward him, his eyes filled with regret and something deeper, something Mark couldn't fully identify. "It means that you're in danger now too." The sound of a car pulling up outside the house cut the conversation short. Tyler looked out the window and panic crossed his face. "They're here!" Mark felt his throat tighten. "Who? What's going on, Tyler?" "I was part of something dark, Mark, and they're here to settle the score." Tyler grabbed Mark's arm with a grip that conveyed urgency. "You have to trust me, now." What should have been a night of desire and discovery had turned into a nightmare. Fear now gripped Mark as he looked at Tyler, unsure if he could trust him anymore. But one thing was clear. Mark's life was about to change in ways he never imagined. And, in that moment, he knew nothing would ever be the same. The sound of the collision still echoed in Mark's ears, as he stayed crouched in the back seat of the car, his body tense, every muscle ready to snap. Tyler's breathing was heavy and irregular beside him, a mix of relief and pure adrenaline. For a brief moment, there was only silence. The car that had been chasing them had crashed violently into a tree, and the world around them seemed suspended in a surreal stillness. "We made it," Mark whispered, feeling the night's cold air press down on him, while his mind tried to catch up with what had just happened. But Tyler's answer wasn't one of total relief. His eyes remained glued to the rearview mirror for a few more seconds, as if he still expected something. "For now, yes," he said in a deep voice, "but these people don't give up easily. We need to get out of here before they have a chance to regroup." Mark's mind was spinning with questions and uncertainty. Who were these people? Why were they willing to kill over something Tyler did? And why had he let himself get involved with someone who was running from such a dangerous past? All he knew was that he was with a man who attracted him in an indescribable way, but who was also dragging him into the abyss, and now he was in it too deeply. Tyler hit the gas, pulling away from the crash site quickly, but maintaining controlled speed. He knew the chase was far from over, but but there was a calm methodicalness in his movements, a precision Mark recognized as the result of someone used to extreme risk situations. "We're heading to a safe place," Tyler finally said after long minutes of silence. "I have a contact who can help us. He doesn't ask questions, and that's all we need right now." Mark nodded slowly, still trying to process everything that had happened. He was emotionally exhausted, but knew this was far from over. Every part of his body screamed to get out of this situation. But something about Tyler, something deeper, kept him rooted there, a mix of physical attraction and the feeling that he needed to understand what had really happened to this man. The night dragged on, and questions continued to pile up in Mark's mind. "Tyler," he began, breaking the tense silence. "You mentioned a group. What kind of group is this? And how did you get involved?" Tyler took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his jaw tense as he thought about the answer. "It's an information cartel," he said finally, his voice distant. "I was young, Mark. I got involved with them because I thought I could make a lot of money. The job was simple. They sold secrets, data, anything valuable in the black market. I didn't ask the right questions back then. I was too blinded by the money, by the thrill of being part of something that seemed powerful." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. An information cartel? This sounded like something out of a spy movie. But the seriousness in Tyler's voice made him realize it was far closer to reality than he wanted to believe. "And how did you get out?" Mark asked, his voice soft, as if afraid any loud sound would bring more trouble. Tyler let out a bitter laugh, devoid of humor. "No one gets out, Mark. That's the problem. You can try to run, you can try to build a new life, but they always find you. I tried, for years, but I was never fast enough." There was a pain in Tyler's words that made Mark lean slightly toward him. For the first time, he saw real vulnerability in the man beside him. The confident and self-assured Tyler, who had once seemed unshakable, now showed cracks in his armor. Mark didn't know what to do with this new side of him, but the attraction he felt only deepened. "So why now?" Mark asked. "Why are they after you again?" Tyler glanced at him briefly before turning his eyes back to the road. "Because I did something they can't forgive," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I stole information from them, and I sold it to another group. I thought it would be my way out, a big enough hit for me to disappear forever." Mark felt a fresh wave of shock pass through his body. You stole from them, and now you're running." Tyler nodded. "They want revenge, Mark, and they won't stop until they get it." Fear surged inside Mark again, but something deeper also emerged. He looked at Tyler, the desire and fear mixing into a storm of emotions that left him confused. There was so much about this man he still didn't know, but at the same time, he couldn't deny the connection he felt. Even with everything falling apart around them, Tyler's presence made him want to keep going, to understand more, and perhaps, somehow, save him, or be saved by him. They finally arrived at a motel on the side of a deserted road, surrounded only by dark fields and the distant sound of wind howling. Tyler parked the car and turned off the engine, remaining silent for a few seconds, as if preparing for what was to come. "This is the place," he said finally. "We'll stay here for now. Tomorrow, I'll try to contact my friend." Mark got out of the car with shaky legs, feeling the night's cold wind wrap around him. Tyler grabbed the key at the motel's desk without any issue, and they climbed to a modest room, where the dim yellow lights cast heavy shadows on the walls. When the door closed behind them, silence filled the room, and Mark realized his entire body was exhausted. Tyler watched him for a moment, as if assessing something, and then, unexpectedly, he stepped closer to Mark, his gaze fixed on his eyes. "I'm sorry for this," Tyler said, his voice finally revealing a touch of emotion that had been absent before. "I didn't want to drag you into this, but now, I don't know how to get you out." Mark looked at Tyler, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew the situation was serious, but at the same time, the heat of Tyler's body so close to his made his breath quicken. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his hand reaching out to touch Tyler's face. "I don't care," Mark murmured, his eyes locked with Tyler's. I just want you." Tyler didn't hesitate. In one swift movement, he pulled Mark toward him, their lips crashing together in a kiss that was both desperate and full of desire. The world around them disappeared as their bodies pressed against each other, Tyler's hands exploring Mark's body with an urgency that sent shivers down his spine. The night had changed once again, and now, the danger seemed to be the spark that ignited the desire between them. The sound of tires screeching on the road echoed in Mark's ears as Tyler sped the car forward, the headlights of the vehicle pursuing them growing closer with each passing second. The fear gripped Mark's chest like an iron fist as his body fought to stay calm. He could see the tension in Tyler's face, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the road ahead, calculating every possible escape route. But Mark knew they were running out of time. "What do we do now?" Mark asked, his voice trembling as he tried to hide the panic rising inside him. "Hold on," was all Tyler said, his tone filled with determination, but shadowed by something darker. He pressed the gas pedal even harder, the engine roaring beneath them as the car gained speed. Mark glanced into the rearview mirror again. The vehicle chasing them wasn't backing down. In fact, it seemed to be getting dangerously close. The blinding glare of the headlights flooded the inside of Tyler's car, casting ominous shadows across their faces. Tyler made a sharp turn, trying to shake off their pursuers, but Mark could feel the desperation creeping in. He couldn't believe that, in the span of a few hours, His life had been flipped upside down. All he had wanted was an exciting night, with a man who had drawn him in like no one else. Now he was running for his life. "Tyler, please, tell me what's going on," Mark pleaded, his voice finally breaking under the pressure. "I need to understand. If you want me to trust you, I need to know what we're dealing with." Tyler remained silent for a moment, his eyes still focused on the road, but Mark could see the internal battle on his face. Finally he spoke, his voice low and filled with frustration. "I was part of a scheme trafficking information years ago, but I left, Mark. I left and thought I could run from that life, thought I'd never have to look back, but they never let anyone leave." Mark stayed quiet, absorbing the confession that seemed too surreal to be true. "What kind of trafficking?" Tyler turned to face him, his face hardened by tension, but also tinged with an uncontrollable desire. "They deal with illegal things, Mark. Human trafficking. Stolen data. Selling secrets. I didn't want to drag you into this, but now they know about you. They know we're together." Mark felt a cold chill run down his spine. He looked at Tyler, trying to comprehend how the man he desired so desperately could be involved in something so dark. "Together. Tyler, we barely know each other. How can it be that serious?" Tyler moved closer to him, his eyes burning with intensity. "It's not about how long we've known each other. They know you're with me now, and that makes you a target. You don't understand. This is much bigger than the two of us." Mark tried to take a deep breath, but his chest was tight with fear and anxiety. "So what do we do? How do we get out of this?" Before Tyler could answer, a loud thud on the back of the car cut through their conversation. The sound reverberated through the air, sending a chill down Mark's spine. Tyler froze for a second, his body tense with alertness. Then he looked at Mark, his decision already made. "You have to trust me," he said, grabbing Mark by the hand and leading him toward the hallway. "We're getting out of here, but you'll have to do exactly what I say." Mark's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He wanted to scream, wanted to run, but something in Tyler's eyes kept him grounded. Something deeper than the immediate danger. Something that still pulled him toward the man who had captivated him from the beginning. They ran through the house, and Mark could hear voices outside, threatening voices that made his skin crawl. Tyler led him to the back door, opening it carefully. The cold night air hit Mark's face, sending a shiver through his body. "We're going out the back, getting to my car, and getting the hell out of here," Tyler whispered, his words quick and precise. "They won't follow us for long, but we have to move fast." Mark could barely process what was happening. He was in a house he barely knew, with a man who now felt like a stranger, and at the same time, the only one he could trust. The adrenaline coursed through his veins as he followed Tyler through the dark backyard, his eyes scanning for any movement. When they reached Tyler's car, he quickly unlocked it, and both of them jumped inside, the engine roaring to life. Mark felt a momentary sense of relief as they sped down the deserted street, leaving the house behind, but the anxiety still bubbled beneath the surface. "Tyler, where are we going?" "Away from here," was all Tyler replied, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He accelerated down the empty street, the tension in the air thick and suffocating. As they drove, the silence between them was heavy, filled with unasked questions. Mark couldn't stop looking at Tyler, trying to find some clue about who he really was, and, more than that, trying to understand why, even now, his body still responded to Tyler in such an intense way, as if the danger and desire were intrinsically linked. Finally, Tyler broke the silence. "I know this sounds crazy, but I need you to trust me. I'll keep you safe, Mark." I promise. Mark wanted to believe him, but the doubt still gnawed at him. "You say that, but I don't even know if I can trust you now. How do I know I'm not just getting into something even worse?" Tyler glanced at him briefly, his hardened face softening for a moment. "I get why you feel that way, but I'll prove I'm on your side. I never wanted you involved in this, but now, we're in this together." There was a moment of silence before Tyler continued, his voice lower and charged with something deeper. I can't lose you." The confession took Mark by surprise. There was a vulnerability in Tyler that he hadn't expected, something that pulled him back to the man he had desired from the beginning. Mark felt the weight of those words, and even with everything around them chaotic, his heart wavered. He wanted to believe Tyler. He wanted everything to be different. But before he could respond, the lights of a car appeared behind them, speeding up fast. Mark looked into the rearview mirror, feeling the panic return in full force. "Tyler there, following us." Tyler tightened his grip on the steering wheel, accelerating even more. "Hold on." Mark's heart pounded in his chest, the fear now mixed with the adrenaline of an imminent chase. They were about to be caught, and Mark knew that, if they were, the consequences would be catastrophic. The roar of the engine filled the air as Tyler pushed the car to its limit. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as the headlights of their pursuers grew closer. The fear coursing through his veins was unlike anything he had ever felt, a cold grip that refused to let go. Every instinct told him to run, to get out, to do anything but stay in this car hurtling toward danger. Yet, his eyes kept flickering toward Tyler, his only source of hope. And at the same time, the man who had dragged him into this nightmare. The car chasing them was closing the distance. Tyler's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, and Mark could feel the tension radiating from him. He had no idea what Tyler's plan was, if he even had one, but every second felt like it was pushing them closer to the edge. "We're not going to outrun them," Mark said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind rushing past them. "Tyler, what are we gonna do?" Tyler didn't answer immediately. His jaw was clenched, eyes scanning the road ahead, calculating, waiting for the right moment. "Trust me," was all he said, but trusting Tyler was becoming harder with each passing second. Suddenly, Tyler jerked the steering wheel to the right, veering the car off the main road and onto a narrow, winding dirt path. The car skidded as the tires struggled for grip, sending up clouds of dust behind them. The pursuing vehicle followed closely, the headlights cutting through the dust like two sharp blades. Mark gripped the edge of his seat, every nerve in his body alert, waiting for the moment everything would spiral out of control. "This isn't going to work," Mark muttered under his breath, but Tyler remained silent, his focus unshaken. The narrow path twisted and turned, trees lining the sides like ominous sentinels. Mark could hear the low hum of the wind outside, mingling with the pounding in his chest. Then, just as they rounded a particularly sharp bend, Tyler slammed the brakes. The car came to a screeching halt, sending Mark's body lurching forward. His heart raced as he looked toward Tyler, fear coursing through him. "What the hell are you doing?" Mark demanded, his voice trembling with fear and confusion. Tyler didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached under his seat, pulling out a handgun, his face grim as he checked the chamber. Mark's stomach dropped. "You're not serious," Mark whispered, his eyes widening. "You can't be serious." "They're not going to stop, Mark," Tyler said, his voice steady, but laced with an edge that sent shivers down Mark's spine. "The only way this ends is if we stop them first." Mark stared at him, his mind reeling. This wasn't happening. None of this felt real. 1 minute, he'd been drawn to this man by an inexplicable desire, and now he was trapped in a life-or-death situation with him. He wanted to run, to get out, but there was no escape. They were in too deep. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped Mark back to reality. He turned toward the window, his pulse quickening, as he saw shadowy figures moving toward the car through the thick dust. Tyler held up a hand, signaling for him to stay low. Mark's heart pounded in his ears as Tyler quietly opened the car door and stepped out, moving with the practiced precision of someone who had done this before. Mark stayed low in the car, his breath shallow, every sense on high alert. He heard the faint crunch of footsteps getting closer, and then a gunshot rang out, followed by a scream. Mark's body tensed as he ducked lower, his heart racing with panic. Another shot echoed in the night air, and then there was silence. Mark couldn't take it anymore. He pushed open the car door and stumbled out, his legs shaking beneath him. Tyler was standing a few feet away, his gun still raised, his expression unreadable. 2 men lay on the ground, motionless, their bodies twisted in unnatural angles. Mark's stomach turned as he took in the scene, bile rising in his throat. "You killed them," Mark whispered, his voice shaking. "Tyler, what did you do?" Tyler's face was a mask of cold determination, but Mark could see the weight of what had just happened in his eyes. "I didn't have a choice, Mark. They were going to kill us. It was them or us." Mark felt the ground sway beneath him. He'd never seen anything like this, never imagined he would be in a situation where life and death were decided so easily. He staggered back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. I can't do this," Mark muttered, his hands shaking. "This is too much." Tyler stepped toward him, his eyes softening for a brief moment. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I didn't want this for you. But we're in this now and we have to keep moving." Mark looked at Tyler, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions crash over him. There was the undeniable attraction that still burned inside him, but now it was tangled up with fear, confusion, and guilt. How could he still want someone who had just taken lives right in front of him? How had he ended up in this mess? Before he could process it further, the sound of a car engine roared in the distance. Mark's heart leapt into his throat as he realized there were more of them. "Tyler, we have to go. Now." Tyler nodded, his face set in grim determination. They jumped back into the car, and Tyler slammed his foot on the gas, sending the car speeding down the narrow dirt road. Mark's hands were trembling as he gripped the seat, his mind spinning with everything that had happened. As they drove, the headlights of another car appeared behind them, and the chase was back on. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears as the car swerved wildly along the narrow path, the trees on either side blurring into dark shapes. Every instinct screamed at him to get out, to run, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in this nightmare, and he had no idea how it would end. "We can't keep running," Mark said, his voice tight with fear. "Tyler, they're going to catch us." Tyler's eyes flickered toward him, and Mark could see the weight of his decision reflected in them. "Then we don't run anymore." Before Mark could respond, Tyler made another sharp turn, this time veering off the path entirely and into the thick forest. The car jostled violently as it tore through the underbrush, branches scraping against the windows. Mark braced himself, his heart in his throat, as the car careened down a steep slope and came to a sudden stop at the edge of a small clearing. Tyler shut off the engine, the sudden silence deafening in the wake of the chaos. Mark's breath came in ragged gasps as he looked around, his mind struggling to catch up with everything that had just happened. "We have to hide," Tyler said, his voice low and urgent. "They won't stop until they find us." Mark nodded, his legs shaking as he stepped out of the car. The night air was cold, and the sound of distant footsteps sent a fresh wave of fear through him. Tyler grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the thick line of trees at the edge of the clearing. Mark's mind was spinning, every nerve on high alert. He didn't know if they would survive the night, but in that moment, the only thing he could focus on was the feel of Tyler's hand in his, the connection that had drawn him into this chaos in the first place. And as they disappeared into the shadows, Mark couldn't help but wonder if they would ever make it out alive. The forest closed in around them, the dense trees and underbrush making every step feel like an effort to push through the weight of the night. Mark could barely see where they were going, the darkness swallowing everything beyond the narrow beams of moonlight filtering through the trees. Tyler's grip on his hand was firm, pulling him forward with determination. But Mark's mind was a whirlwind of fear, confusion, and the deepening sense that they were running out of options. Behind them, the distant sound of engines revving echoed through the still air. Their pursuers hadn't given up. Mark's heart raced, the reality of their situation hitting him like a ton of bricks. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and had no clear way out. "Tyler," Mark gasped, his breath coming in sharp bursts as they stumbled through the thick undergrowth. "We can't outrun them forever. What's the plan?" Tyler didn't slow down, his eyes focused ahead. "There's a cabin not far from here, deep in the woods. It's an old safe house I used back when things were different. If we can make it there, we can regroup, figure out our next move." Mark's legs burned with exhaustion, but he pushed on, knowing that stopping wasn't an option. The thought of a safe house, a place where they could hide and breathe for a moment, gave him a flicker of hope, but the relentless pounding of his heart reminded him that they weren't out of danger yet. The moonlight barely illuminated the path ahead, but Tyler moved with certainty, leading Mark through the thick forest as if he knew every step by heart. Mark could hear the faint sounds of their pursuers behind them, the distant crack of branches and the low murmur of voices. Growing closer, they were getting too close. "Tyler, they're catching up," Mark whispered, fear seeping into his voice. Tyler glanced back at him, his face shadowed, but intense. "We'll make it. We just need a few more minutes." But minutes felt like hours, and the further they went, the more Mark's fear began to outweigh his hope. His breath was ragged, his body screaming in protest with every step. He could feel the sweat trickling down his back, the cold night air doing little to ease the heat of his panic. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they broke through the trees into a small clearing. There, barely visible against the dark backdrop of the forest, was a rundown cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, with ivy crawling up the sides and a rickety wooden porch that creaked under Tyler's weight as he approached. "This is it," Tyler said, his voice low but urgent. "It's not much, but it'll keep us hidden for a while." Mark looked around, his eyes darting nervously to the tree line. The sounds of their pursuers were closer now. Too close. He could hear them, their footsteps growing louder with each passing second. Tyler pulled him inside the cabin, quickly shutting the door behind them. The interior was as run down as the outside, with dust-covered furniture and broken windows, but it was shelter, and for now, that was all that mattered. Tyler moved quickly, barricading the door with an old chair, and motioning for Mark to keep quiet. They stood in silence, their backs pressed against the walls, listening for any sign that their pursuers had found them. Mark's heart pounded so loudly in his chest that he was sure Tyler could hear it. Every second felt like a lifetime, the tension suffocating him. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the undergrowth outside the cabin made Mark's blood run cold. "They're here," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. Tyler nodded, his face tense as he slowly reached for the handgun tucked into his waistband. "Stay low. Don't make a sound." Mark's breath caught in his throat as he crouched behind an old, tattered couch, his eyes wide with fear. He could hear the footsteps moving closer, circling the cabin. The faint beam of a flashlight flickered through the broken window, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Mark's heart pounded in his ears as he pressed himself against the floor, praying they wouldn't be found. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The footsteps outside grew louder, more deliberate. Whoever was out there knew they were close, and Mark could feel the walls closing in on him. Tyler remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the door, his grip on the gun steady. But Mark could see the tension in his body, the anticipation of what was about to happen. Then, suddenly, the sound of a car engine roared to life in the distance. The footsteps paused, and Mark held his breath, his heart hammering in his chest. The engine grew louder, and then, to his shock, it began to fade away. The footsteps retreated, and for a moment, all was silent. Mark didn't dare move. He waited, his body frozen in fear, listening for any sign that it was a trick. But the only sound that remained was the rustling of the wind through the trees. "They're gone," Tyler whispered, his voice filled with a mix of relief and disbelief. Mark slowly stood up, his legs trembling. Are you sure?" Tyler nodded, his eyes still scanning the windows. "For now, but they'll be back." Mark exhaled a shaky breath, his entire body shaking from the adrenaline and fear. "Tyler, I don't know how much more of this I can take. I didn't sign up for this." Tyler turned to face him, his expression softening. "I know. I never wanted this for you, Mark. But I'm going to fix it. I'm going to get you out of this." Mark looked into Tyler's eyes, searching for the truth in his words. He wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that Tyler would find a way to get them both out of this nightmare. But deep down, Mark knew that no matter what Tyler promised, they were both in too deep now. Tyler moved closer to him, his hand reaching out to gently touch Mark's face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice filled with regret. "For everything." Mark and Tyler barely escaped the cabin after the firefight, fleeing into the forest as their pursuers closed in. Exhausted and scared, they ran until they reached a steep cliff. Tyler, knowing they were out of options, insisted they jump to avoid capture. Mark hesitated, but with the enemy closing in, he followed Tyler's lead. They leapt off the edge, disappearing into the darkness below. Tyler and Mark survived the jump, landing in a river that swept them downstream, bruised and battered. They crawled onto the riverbank, but their situation was still dire. They couldn't stay hidden for long, and Tyler knew their pursuers wouldn't give up. He promised Mark that they would find a way to escape for good, but time was running out. Tyler and Mark were found just before reaching the city. In a brief, intense fight, Tyler distracted their attackers, allowing Mark to escape. Tyler's sacrifice left Mark heartbroken, but free.